Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm hoping you guys are all having a fantastic day. So in today's video, as you can tell by the title, we will be talking about this large large snowstorm that has a potential of occurring around the next weekend into Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So not this week, but that would be the days of the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th of December. Now, this system will be mainly tracking across the west as a small disturbance before really starting to take off across the southern United States with potentially severe weather, rain, and then obviously snow as it moves up kind of along the Ohio River Valley, potentially the Northeast or Midwest, depending on which model track you look at. So the exact details of this thing are still very blurry, and they will continue to be blurry most likely for a good while as the models seem to be jumping around quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's anything too unusual, but it's definitely not one of those systems that the models have pinned down from a far distance. It doesn't seem like that, and there's a lot of variables and a lot of jumping around, more than I would typically want to see. If you recall, the GFS was pretty consistent in yesterday's video. I was showing you its model runs, and it still is showing the system. However, you could see this was yesterday's model run, for example, right at the evening time frame, showed a pretty large system, especially across the Northeast with a lot of rain and snow. And do note that in the morning hours today, it's kind of changed it. Obviously made it go way further west, right? So that's not too unusual. You could see it developed a massive cold front there with some cold air following it. And in the noontime hours, it almost completely got rid of the system, right? You could barely call that a storm. And then in the most recent model run, as it runs 4 times a day, it brought the system back, and you can see it's more in the shape of what it was yesterday, but it's a little bit stronger now, which is weird, right? It went from a weaker system to almost nothing, you know, a non-merging of the ingredients, which resulted in no system, and now it shows a system again. So with that being said, I wanted to show you that because I now kind of prefer the European solely kind of because of this. It's been the more consistent model. It's been not jumping around nearly as much as the GFS. Granted, it only comes out twice a day, while the GFS comes out 4 times a day, but still, you know, it could have also changed, and it didn't. So let me start off by showing you the European. So again, I'm not really going to focus on anything up until that point because there will be some activity across the US, but mainly we're going to see a gradual warming trend for a good portion of the United States and continued flow into the Northwest. If you live there, you're going to see continued disturbances, and one of those disturbances is going to come down and create quite a trough in the United States. It's going to come down pretty far to the south, and notice we have a lot of warm air pumping up out ahead of it, and because it is so close to the Gulf Coast, it can tap in on a lot of that moisture very quickly, which also is concerning for the severe weather. But granted, notice on the 12th of December, so this is next week, a Saturday, late Saturday, early Sunday, we are beginning to see the developments of this. We have a nice trough of cold air, which obviously would allow for snow, and this thing turns, it tilts itself almost completely on a neutral tilt there, and you can see that it really starts racing towards the north. The European shows extreme amounts of moisture getting pumped into this thing. Obviously very heavy snow on the backside of this. I'm not, you know, naming really cities that would see snow yet. I mean, in this case, you could see it would be Detroit and portions of Ohio, but the point of that the point of me not naming it is because it's changing too much, and it's kind of useless. This could shift further west, or it could shift further east, be more of a nor'easter, or it could completely change its characteristics and be more, you know, not necessarily as tilted of a system positively, and it could really just be more of like a slider. So we'll have to wait and see what exactly does, but you can see the European develops this thing into a monster. This was the midnight model run, right? And yeah, I mean, this thing is a beast wherever this thing does end up landing. I mean, 959 millibars is extremely powerful. So that's the European from the midnight model run. The most recent run of the European shows a pretty similar system. Again, we see that disturbance come off the west, go pretty far to the south, a lot of moisture. It begins to develop a little bit earlier with this most recent model run. So notice it's tracked a little bit further west, the precipitation shield, but very similar characteristics, right? It blows up, moisture loaded, absolutely very strong winds on the north side of this thing, very heavy snowfall rates, and it also explodes into a pretty darn strong system. And so that's the European scenario. Obviously, that would result in quite a bit of precipitation, quite a bit of snowfall. Notice especially where this system kind of develops, swings, and rotates. So obviously further south there probably will be also very high amounts. They'll be more localized with thunderstorms here. You can see it's a broad area of precipitation. Peep also these amounts over here across the Northwest. Very impressive. total snowfall accumulation, according to the European, assuming a 10-to-1 ratio. Again, pretty significant. And what's more significant is some of these locations could be pretty far to the south, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. Some of these would probably be even higher, assuming cold air infiltrates in. Where exactly this lines up is a little bit of a question mark. The GFS, obviously, I'm showing you it right now. Very similar again, right? There's a trough, it dips down. That seems to be common amongst the models. The GFS develops this much earlier on, and it's not necessarily as quickly picked up by the strong jet stream and shot to the north. It glides eastward for a little bit, but it still develops into a very strong system, lots of moisture, and a lot of cold air on the backside of it. So, but again, just because the GFS has been less consistent, I don't trust it as much now. But do note, a lot of snow could fall across southern Canadian, U.S., eastern United States, quite a bit. And again, this precipitation map doesn't show necessarily all the impacts, because there's definitely been systems that have dropped a lot more snow than this one. Except this one's going to be large. It's going to be during a relatively busy travel time. Not the peak rate. It's still a little bit away from Christmas, but there will be some traveling going on. Definitely elevated. And also the fact that, this thing will have a lot of rain with it, so the snow is just one side of it. Severe weather, I'm kind of concerned about that, especially given how low it is and close to the Gulf of Mexico. And then, of course, the winds and the cold air behind it are also going to be a story of their own. Though, granted, the cold air won't be nearly as cold as it seems as the zonal flow will really kind of push a lot of that cold air out, even if it is very cold, very quickly. So at least there's that silver lining to it. But yeah, very active pattern looks to be unfolding. I want to show you now the Canadian model. So Canadian is a third model that we use. It's also a pretty good model. I don't like it nearly as much as the GFS nor the European, but if there's like a tiebreaker, sometimes it's used with the European and Canadian agree. It's said, they always say that the GFS usually then is the outlier, then you favor the Canadian and European. If the Canadian agrees with the GFS, then the European may be more a little bit an outlier, but oftentimes it's the Canadian has its own story to tell, and that's going to be this case as well. I'll show you in just a little bit. So notice there's that trough. It doesn't go as far to the south as with the European and GFS. It does begin developing the system much further west than any of the models of the European or GFS. And you can see it doesn't evolve it into a massive system until much later. It begins to develop it here, but it's already pretty much offshore with a good portion of its impacts by the time it's developing into a really well-developed storm. It still drops a lot of snow, potentially very heavy rain across the northeast, and it spins away. But again, a lot less impactful a scenario like that. So you can see the snowfall accumulations, let's get rid of that, would be a lot less and pretty much reserved for northeast and New England, even more specifically, some portions of Canada, Quebec there, and into Labrador and Newfoundland areas. So that is that. Again, I don't really think this will be the correct scenario, but it's definitely still interesting to look at. Another feature that we have is ensembles, right? So this is a website that allows me to look at EPS members. So the European model has a bunch of, cousins and family, and there's 51 of them, each one with a different solution, and we can look at their different outcomes. So notice that this is 15 days out, so this is obviously not all from the storm we're talking about, but we're more focused here because most of the models, the ensembles, do show a system occurring here. So any snowfall you see will be most likely from that system, and you can see some take it further north, some take it further west into Illinois, Iowa, Missouri to Michigan. Some keep it further north. Maybe they start developing here, but it only becomes a really big system once it hits Canada. And some really do something completely different, more at a different angled approach. So you can see that there is definitely a congruence of models that show some heavy snow here, except it's just too variable at this point to start pinning down what will occur. And I just wanted to make today's video saying that nothing really has changed. It still looks as if the potential for a heavy snowmaker is there. It's just that we are, still trying to decipher what exactly is most likely to happen. The GFS also has members of its own, and in this case, I can't show you the whole map of the United States, but I can show you certain regions. But with the GFS ensembles, it's cool. I can show you all of them at once. I can't do that with the European. So notice that around that time frame of Saturday, Sunday, we see an explosion, right? It's a little small, so forgive me, but do notice that almost all the models show some sort of swath of snow being laid down. Now, they're all over the place, right? Some pretty far west into Minnesota, Wisconsin, some further south, some further east. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens. And in case you're wondering, in the long range, it seems as if the models continue an active pattern with a lot of laying down of swaths of snow and whatnot. So this system is going to be definitely one that we're going to have to watch. In the meantime, up until that point, again, we do have a system across the Northeast that is currently dropping snow across Canada and some rain further south. New England picking up some snow. We will continue to see very intense activity in terms of precipitation across, Washington, Oregon, British Columbia into this early part to mid part of the week. And again, one of those will finally move on shore and drop that trough. But before that, we do have that southern Canadian clipper that will be out ahead of a very warm air mass. So it will have quite a bit of actually moisture to tap into, which could result in some decently heavy snow for, say, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. So if you live across the southern Canadian prairies, you could pick up a decent swath of snow there. That's for sure. And then you could see we have that big system developing. And again, we'll just have to wait and see how the models handle this. They've been jumping around quite a bit. It seems as if the models are, like usual, all over the place. I'll keep you guys updated. Stay tuned, and I'll catch you all in the next episode. See ya. Bye.